Ahoy, everyone. This is David Perry with my continuing series of video interviews about how we get from what I like to call the great pause of COVID into the great return. And today, our guest is someone I know well, someone I like to call Mr. San Francisco, because I think he's held just about every job in the city except for mayor. And I think there was a time when a lot of people would have liked him to be. Please welcome the one and only Pat Gallagher. Pat, how are you?
David, thank you. Thanks so much. I certainly wouldn't want to be mayor today. I have to say, I admire the job that she is doing, where she's on the line of fire every day. So good for her. I don't think she would have selected to be mayor at this point either. But on the other hand, this is when you find out about people, when you go through something like this, when you go through, it's funny, you don't necessarily find out about people during the real good times. It's during the sort of the challenging times. So
yeah, when you're forged in the fire, literally.
Yep.
Well, for the 2 or 3 people that don't know who you are, give us a little bit of your history. How did Pat Gallagher come to be one of the most respected professionals in San Francisco? And I'm not blowing smoke by that.
Well, that's very nice. So I spent I spent 32 years as the marketing and business guy with the San Francisco Giants. And the only way to describe, when I started there, tickets were $5. And so you can sort of, do the math when it goes out, and, we can talk a little bit about that. So I was there for 32 years. I was involved in bringing the Super Bowl 50 to the Bay Area, involved in putting the bid together and then sort of running it. And it was great. That's when we got a chance to meet with the work that you did with us. And so now I've been a board chair for San Francisco Travel. I'm sitting on several different boards now. I'm an advisor, which means that people ask me for advice, and so I think about it, and then I give them advice, and hopefully it's good advice. But I'm enjoying it. This whole thing. I wasn't alive during the last pandemic, and I wish that there was some sort of a manual that would show you how to deal with it. So I guess we're going to have to write it.
We're going to have to write it. My grandmother, who raised me, told me stories about the great 1918 pandemic. She was born in 1898, so she was 20 years old. And I would hear her tell these stories and stories about the Great War, and it always seemed like something so distant. But now looking at the pictures from 1918, including many in San Francisco, I realize that this is truly an historic event. I call it the first Twitter pandemic. The 1918 pandemic, of course, killed 55 million people. We certainly don't think this is going to be that bad, and hope not. But the difference was, in 1918, you didn't know what someone was doing in another country. Now, from your place in San Francisco and where I am now in Palm Springs, we can see this pandemic impacting the health and economies around the world. What have you learned in the last 4 months about how a pandemic can change society and work? How have you seen San Francisco change in the last 4 months, for the good and for the ill?
It has shaken all of us out of our comfort zone, no matter where you are around the world. Maybe there's some far place somewhere where it hasn't done that, but it's shaken our confidence. It's shaken the things that we sort of count on. And so there's been some real tragic things that have happened around the pandemic, but I also will say there's been some good things that have happened around it, and we can talk about some of those things. I think that people all of a sudden now have had a big dose of humility, obviously reality, and so I think that maybe that is sort of a good thing, is that people, we tend to look back towards our community, and even though maybe we can't hug the people that we really love, all of them, we can reach out to them. In 1918, they didn't have Twitter, they didn't have Zoom, they didn't have any of that stuff. So you kind of think, what was it probably like for people who were trying to navigate through that and trying to communicate? So this is something that we have, but you're right. This pandemic is probably the recording of this pandemic will hopefully help people in the future.
What was it like for the shutdown for you and your wife? I mean, you were pretty shut down, like we all were, but also, I mean, I remember talking to you early on, and you realized, wow, I'm right in the age they're talking about being vulnerable to this. How does that make you feel?
I am in sort of, all of a sudden, I was always the kid, and now I'm in the vulnerable group. So I think it kind of shook us to our core. You tend to look at the people closest to you. I mean, our family. We've got 2 kids. They are both living they're adults and they're living in different places. So, and our neighbors. We live here in San Francisco, so you can sort of see the visible things. You walk down the street and it looks sort of like a ghost town. And but I think it's been, so we've coped with it. I have to tell you, as an advisor, I'm in a much better position than when I actually had to run a business. I was in charge of business operations for the Giants when we had the earthquake in 1989, which was, a difficult thing, but I couldn't even imagine what it would be like to run a business now. So I'm grateful for that.
It's interesting. You referenced the Loma Prieta quake of '89. We will never forget where we were. I was in the box office of the Opera House. I know where you were that day, Game 5 of the World Series. And isn't it kind of quaint now to look back on that and think, at the time, that was going to be the worst thing we ever went through?
Well, it's hard to what you can imagine. I couldn't have imagined what's going on now. And also the timing of this going on, and all the other things that are going on in our world right now. I mean, I have to tell you, I couldn't have imagined how a civil war could be started in our country. But I have to tell you now, I sort of understand some of the feelings, some of the other challenges that we have all over. So this is one of the things that makes you humble, and it makes you turn to the things that you really, to the people and to the things that you really hold dear and care about. So we're coping just like everybody else is, but and we're trying to keep from going sort of stir crazy, but we're trying to be smart about it. And all the different sort of business things that I'm doing, I've already done, I think, three of these Zoom calls today, which I have to remember to comb my hair. I mean, I look like I did, although my hair is a different color, I look sort of like I did in the 60s. So anyway.
Yeah, someone said to me yesterday, we're all going back to the 1960s, 70s era.
Yeah.
You have always been known as this is how I would describe you, a pragmatic optimist. Would you describe yourself that way? And are you optimistic about what comes after COVID, and what is after COVID? What do we mean by that?
Well, I think that well, thank you. I'd sort of like to think of myself. I mean, I'm sort of more of a glasses half full guy than somebody who looks at a glass and says, well, it's got lipstick on it and it's chipped and there's something wrong. I sort of always look for the best in people and the best. So yeah, I think so. I think we, like I say, we've learned about ourselves, certainly in the business community, in our personal lives, in our physical community. We've learned about people who are suffering and what's being done to try to be empathetic and to take care of them. So yes, I think that we will come back out of this obviously much stronger. We don't have a choice. I think there's going to be some inventions and things that will happen during this time that never would have happened. I've been doing a lot of reading about about one of the last pandemic, and it was a goofy thing, but one of the inventions that was done in 1918 during that pandemic, a simple thing, it was the Dixie cup, the paper drinking cup that was actually invented during that time. And it was done because they didn't, you didn't want to pick up a glass like this or something. And so somebody, said, well, okay, maybe we can make a glass out of paper and we'll maybe put wax on it to keep the water from running through it. And so, look, there's going to be a lot more things that are more sophisticated than the Dixie cup that'll be invented out of this one. But I look at the ingenuity of our people, and it's not just the people in the Bay Area, but all over. I look at the young people who now all of a sudden are experiencing this when they're in their formative years? How is it going to affect their lives? So yeah, I'm optimistic about it, but I'm sad for the pain that it's caused, but I'm optimistic about the way that we're going to come out of it. I think some good things will happen.
Yeah, so you're a half full Dixie cup sort of guy.
Well, yeah, that's right.
Listen, I spoke to a colleague and a co-author that you know well just the other day on this interview series, Stephanie Martin, and was talking to her about how sports are going to come out of this. And you co-wrote a book based on the experience of Super Bowl 50 and what that experience taught the Bay Area. Talk a little bit about that. You know, what do large sporting events like a Super Bowl 50 or a rugby or a PGA, which we're all hopeful to see, although without fans in a couple of weeks, you have been on the front lines of sports as entertainment and infotainment for a long time. What are sports going to look like? And I'm talking about our teams, the Warriors, the Giants, the
Warriors,
Niners.
Giants, college football, college basketball. I've been fortunate enough to be involved in some big events. I mean, several World Series, several All-Star games. The Super Bowl, which is arguably the biggest one-day event on the planet. And it's, I guess, what my reaction is that I think all those things are important, but they're not necessarily a given. I mean, right now we can talk about what we think is going to happen, but none of us really know what is going to happen. So the book you referenced was the book that actually Stephanie sort of prodded me into writing with her after our experience in putting the Super Bowl host committee together. And it's called A Big Game, Bigger Impact. And it's sort of about about putting a Super Bowl together, but it's really more of business principles that could go into anything that we learned, some mistakes that we made. And the reason that we wrote it was to hopefully be a benefit to people who not just are looking at some sort of a big event, but people who are either starting a business or navigating through business challenges, people who are in management programs, sports management programs. I think that we learned what something like a Super Bowl could actually do for a region, and a region that is as complicated and diverse as this one, which made it into a great challenge, but also we had a great result. So the book and it's now I mostly speak about the book, and it's for sale. It's a Kindle version. I actually, if you have problems with going to sleep, I actually had to narrate a whole version of it. It's Amazon Audible. So if you have a problem with insomnia, go on Amazon Audible and download my narration of Big Game, Bigger Impact. But anyway, it was an incredibly great experience. It was something that Stephanie and I had the privilege of doing together. And I think if it's helping college students and others in starting businesses, whatever, then it was really worth doing.
Now, have you done any speaking about that book since COVID happened? And if you have, how have the lessons, you just talked about how some of the lessons are universal. So big game, bigger impact. What are some of the lessons that you talk about in the book that have value now during COVID?
Well, I think that it's the kind of thing where, any sort of an endeavor, I think one of the things we learned, and it seems simple now, but you sort of have to start out with a vision and an outline, sort of what your values are and what kind of an organization do we want? What are the things that we want to accomplish? And, you sort of start big and then narrow it down to the specifics of doing it and making it happen. I think that was, we were smart in that we started that way, and a lot of the vision and values and other things that we put together and figured out a way to communicate it to, there's 7 million people who live in the Bay Area, and as I was the one who said only 70,000 people can go to the Super Bowl. How do you share that experience with all of them and make them all sort of feel a part of it? And we designed ways to do that, and it sort of forced us. So our three main principles was we wanted to make it the most giving Super Bowl ever. So we 25% of the money that we raised we redistributed to charities in the Bay Area. Nobody had really ever done that before. We wanted to make it the most participatory, meaning we wanted to have as many people in the Bay Area who could be touched by it, And also, since we're in the heart of where technology happens, we wanted technology to sort of help us make that happen. So it would be the most shared Super Bowl ever. Those were our three, sort of primary goals. And we describe in the books also sort of how we delivered on all those. But it wasn't just us. We were a small group of people. We had to recruit about 5,000 volunteers to sort of help us be on the front line. And we'd like to think that it affected other people positive. I'll tell you the one thing I'm relieved about is we got through it. I mean, when you do an event like that, you're sort of always waiting for the other shoe to drop. So it didn't drop, at least it hasn't yet.
No, it was wildly successful. And, you talk about 25%, but in real numbers, I mean, I know the answer because, as you recall, I read more than a few press releases about it, working with the committee. How much money did Super Bowl 50 return to nonprofits?
Well, for the nonprofits, at least the amount that we were able to point to, and it's more than that, it was a number of between 11 and $12 million that were redistributed to big and small charities in the Bay Area. Part of the reason was we wanted to do something other than have to clean up after. It's like cleaning up after the circus, and the elephants after the circus leaves town. We wanted it to be something that was there was a reason for doing it, because if you didn't care about the National Football League, or if you didn't care about traffic, it's sort of hard to argue about doing something great for charity. So we wanted to also come up with something that, sort of everybody could, maybe agree on. So that was the amount. There was actually more than that's happened. The ripple effect is more of it. About $250 million was generated in new revenue in the Bay Area that can really be pointed to. Different than a number of them, we did not do an economic impact feasibility study ahead of time. We just said, there's a reason why a lot of communities want to do these Super Bowls. Maybe we'll do ours after, so we can actually use real numbers, and it's maybe smaller than what some people might have puffed it up to be when they're trying to land a Super Bowl. But we feel that we did a credible job, and we also created a body of work that we can hand off to the next people who might want to do an event like that in the Bay Area, and that'll happen again someday.
So in our last few moments, talk to me about I can see the beautiful San Francisco day out your window. I know you're just up the street from Union Street, where we've had more than one or two martinis and several. Let's just say several. Yeah. What do you think San Francisco is going to look like in a few months? And what advice, you started out by saying you wouldn't want to be Mayor London Breed right now, or probably wouldn't want to be Governor Gavin Newsom. What advice, since you are often asked to give advice and now you can, what advice would you give those two people or other leaders that right now are trying to help us get from the great pause into the great return?
Well, it's a great question. I first of all, just understand that you're not going to please everybody. That no matter what you do, you're gonna make some people mad. If you try to make everybody happy, you're going to fail. So I think you have to go with your brain, but with your heart. I think you have to be kind. You have to err on the side of being kind to people. And I think as a sort of an elected official, which both Governor Newsom and Mayor Breed are, is that you have to use your common sense. And the team of people that you have around, you have to look them in the eye when you ask for them to give you and this is not about politics. There's politics in it, but this is not about politics. This is about doing the right thing for the community that you live in. And there's no manual to go to. I mean, what we've seen so far is that we've closed everything down, sort of opened it up a little bit, and then, oh my God, sort of closed it down. And I think more of that is going to happen. So I think that if you look at the things that are positive, I think we're learning a lot about ourselves during this. I think we learn about people who are less fortunate than we are, that you need to to be care of. And I think I worry about, what are the lasting effects of something like this? And I think the lasting effects, again, I'm an optimist. I think the lasting effects are going to be that we're going to be more thoughtful, we'll be better, we'll be kinder, we'll realize what are the real important things in life. And I think that is sort of the result. And the advice I would give to elected officials on this is be kind, but use common sense.
So last question, because you've referenced it several times in our conversation today about you learn a lot about yourself during this. What has Pat Gallagher learned about Pat Gallagher, specifically from what I like to call the worst Friday the 13th that I remember, Friday, March 13th, 2020, to right now during this pandemic? What have you learned about yourself?
Let me think about this. What I've learned about myself is that I sort of thought that I'd seen everything. You reach a certain age and you said, well, there's nothing that surprises me. Well, hey, this surprised me. So I've been surprised, I've been awed, I've been humbled. Because other people, people look to me to sort of put some sort of a take on it. And usually I try to do a sort of a humorous take on things. This one's much more serious. And so I think what I learned is that people are basically good, and they are, that they really want to take care of themselves. And I guess sometimes we sort of tend to focus on the people who are the renegades, the ones that cause problems, the ones that we see on the news, every night, whatever. And I think that's sort of a fringe part of it. I don't think that represents the good in people on this. So what I've learned about myself is that sort of the faith that I have in human nature, I think has sort of been restored in a way. And I think that, I think it's good that we've been humbled a little bit. I think it's nice not to have traffic, when you do venture out. But I think it's I'm proud to be a San Franciscan. I'm sort of proud of the way that our community has reacted. And have we done everything right? No, we haven't. But you know what? We've done it to the best of our ability, and we've used conviction in how we've done this. And that's what I've learned about myself, and I've learned about San Franciscans, is that we, for the most part, we try to do the right thing. And that sort of gives you, it restores your faith in human nature.
Thank you, Pat Gallagher, an optimist. Here's to a half full, actually overflowing Dixie cup with a nice martini in it soon.
Wait a minute, can you drink a martini in a Dixie cup?
Well, not the size that I like, so no.
All right, fair enough.
Shot. We'll do a shot. Thank you, Pat Gallagher. This is David Perry.
Thanks, David.